about sustainable agriculture, we're about looking after the land in any way we can do it, and what we want is ideas from you on the best way to approach land management in Cape York.
We're the conservationists because that's how the land is as it is today. We're the conservationists. It doesn't matter who we are, but we're the conservationists. We've been keeping this land as it is. Now they want it.
And that it's important again to see a dialogue emerge between people in Cape York generally and both state and federal governments and people in Southern Australia in general. It is really important that if we're going to see a great future for fantastic livelihoods for people on the Cape, that we're talking to each other. I understand why there's desire to see regulation. Regulation does have its place, but we need to be talking much more seriously about the holistic picture of the future management of the Cape. For a long, long time, Cape York has been subject to a lot of external influences. I'm a very strong believer that to get things right, you really need to be supporting people to come up with regionally based solutions. It's pretty important that we see as much support as possible to get all the major stakeholders back together again, right across Cape York, to have a consistent discussion about where should things be going for the future.
It used to be in the old days that we had large pastoral properties all over the Cape. Each one of them contributed rates to Cookshire Council. In return, we looked after the roads and the services. A lot of those properties have been now taken up by national parks. We have to take the rubbish out of those national parks. We've got to look after the fencing. We've got to look after the roads and the gates and the grids. Our workload's actually gone up, but we don't have any income. While Council would like to try and encourage development, encourage entrepreneurship up here in the Cape, state government's loaded us up with so many levels of restriction with the Wild Rivers Act, with the Veg Management Act, with the Cape York Heritage Act, and all those compliance codes within the IDAS and building codes and regulations. So it's a triple whammy actually. We've got more work to do, we've got no income, and we're having to turn away business because of these layers of bureaucracy. Culturally, environmentally, that's a special place, but it's also a very diverse opportunity. People say it should be a World Heritage area over the whole of the Cape, but it won't work. It can't work, and it hasn't got the values to be the whole Cape. Have a look at the mining industry in Australia. Over in Western Australia, for example, Kakadu National Park, beautiful place, World Heritage listed. It sits adjacent to the Hamersley Range, which is the world's biggest body of iron ore and which is keeping Australia afloat at the moment. We need to look at opportunities like that in the Cape.
We would have liked to have seen some government bureaucrats here, particularly in relation to Wild Rivers, land tenure and World Heritage, because then they are the ones that are able to speak the facts that they want to put forward to the people better than any of us can. The contentious issues that we're dealing with at this meeting are Wild Rivers, World Heritage and land tenure. There is a level of frustration because of the multiple layers of legislation and levels of bureaucratic influence in Cape York, because it is stopping them from undertaking normal day-to-day activities. There is a positive future for Cape York if we can have everything done in a balanced manner. The environment can coexist, does coexist with people, and can enable people to have a normal livelihood without being locked up and normal activities being taken away from them. People do not know what that actually means and will mean to them and their future generations. We need to have some answers given.
The main issues is security, and by security I don't mean just security of tenure. It's security that you're going to be able to still run your properties in a manner that you can handle, your management is possible. Declaring things like Wild Rivers, World Heritage, without actually talking to the people on the ground that have got the local knowledge of what works and what doesn't work. A lot of money is spent on putting these things in place, where if that money was spent on actual management on the ground, you'd get a lot better environmental outcomes. Cape York is also bigger than Victoria. We're not talking about a little tiny point up the top. We're talking about an area bigger than Victoria. Because of the background for the last 20, 30 years, we've been fighting and fighting and fighting, trying to keep the pastoral industry recognised as the ones who have looked after the land for a couple of 100 years now. If it's supposedly pristine, they deserve the credit. what they need to do is to actually assist the graziers and other landholders to look after the land in a better way, but while they can still have the two values. There's room enough for environmental and economic issues to proceed.
Pastoral owners have really very little say in how their property is developed into the future, and they have no long-term tenure of that land. And a huge amount of the pastoral properties on Cape York are being bought up by state government departments and reverted to national parks. And it's a huge pressure on the people who border those national parks. Are they going to be the next ones to go? Are they going to be offered good compensation for the land, or are they just going to be forced out with really no compensation at all? Yeah, it's an interesting concept that the people down south in the major cities in Sydney and Brisbane and Melbourne, they tend to think of Cape York as this huge wilderness zone with nobody there. That's not the case, and it hasn't been the case for a long, long time. The Indigenous people have been on the peninsula for thousands and thousands of years. The pastoral people have been here for 150 years or more, and they've looked after the land. The reason why the land is the way it is because you've had people there looking after it. You take a property and you turn it into a national park, does not mean to say that that property will then be looked after and protected and preserved. They take the people off it, they take the cattle off it, but then they don't manage it properly. When you've got a pastoral lease, you've got people riding all over it all the time, keeping the weeds down, the feral weeds and the feral animals, the pigs and whatever, and ensuring that that land stays viable. And it's got to stay viable to be a proper cattle property. If you take the people out of the equation, the weeds proliferate, the pigs proliferate, the water courses get churned up, and the land degrades. There's an enormous amount of examples on Cape York where good pastoral property has degraded and has become infested with weeds and feral animals, and it's because the people have been taken out of the equation.
Well, the most pressing issue is that I run a business, rock art business, and I run it on a deed of ground and trust area, what they call doggeds, and there's no sense of security for me to later on maybe sell my business. We can't have any security in what type of, if we can still be there, whether we can run it still as a business, because the title, whether we will continue as we are, and we've been continuing as we are on a kind of a loan basis. So where we now waiting for issues to come up to say that, well, yes, this is what you can do. How I'd like to see it is that there's an opportunity here for Aboriginal people to become economically viable, and I've proven that on my own that it is viable. But where do we go from here to take that forward? And that's the part that I'm really stuck with.